Cave of Death. In 2005, 5 friends set out to explore Cave of Death in the Utah mountains in the early hours of the morning. At around 2 o'clock, they arrived at a small, water-filled cave. The entrance was just 4 feet tall, forcing them to crawl. Inside, the cave narrowed quickly, and the main hazard was hidden below the surface. A tight underwater tunnel ran from one side of the cave to the other. It measured only 18 by 20 inches and extended 15 feet through solid rock. It was completely submerged. Navigating it required full submersion, total commitment, and absolute confidence in finding the exit. One of the 5, Jennifer Galbraith, 21 years old, had been there before. She had previously attempted the swim and survived, though she had passed out from hypothermia during that first experience. Despite that, she convinced her friends that the passage was possible and encouraged them to try it with her. Blake Donner, 24, Scott McDonald, 28, and Ariel Singe, 18, followed Jennifer into the narrow cave. The 5th friend stayed outside, waiting for them to return. Jennifer entered the water first. The others assumed she had made it through and followed, one after the other, but none of them resurfaced. There was a rope running along the submerged tunnel to guide divers from one end to the other. It was placed there to prevent disorientation in the pitch-black water, but it appeared that none of them used it. Without guidance, it was easy to miss the exit and swim into a dead end. A diver who had previously completed the passage later described how he became lost and had to back himself out to find the real opening. That mistake had nearly killed him. For Jennifer and her friends, it did. By 6:25 in the morning, after hours had passed without any sign of the group, the friend who had stayed behind called for help. Rescuers arrived and began the operation. One theory suggested that the group may have reached the other side of the tunnel, but collapsed due to the low oxygen levels in the cave chamber. Underground spaces often contain elevated nitrogen or carbon dioxide. Without proper airflow, even a small group of people can consume the breathable air within minutes. Once oxygen is depleted, confusion sets in, followed by unconsciousness. The tunnel was so narrow it could only fit one person at a time. Each friend likely entered the water expecting a clear path ahead, unaware that those before them had already failed to escape. When the bodies were recovered, they were found in a line, one behind the other, all facing the same direction. All of them were facing the exit. Driebelbis Cave Tragedy. It was late on Saturday evening, October 1st, 1983, when 6 experienced cave explorers entered Driebelbis Cave near the quiet town of Kutztown, Pennsylvania. These weren't beginners. They were seasoned spelunkers, well acquainted with the underground world. The cave was familiar terrain, a place they had explored before without incident. For several hours, they navigated the winding passages deep beneath the surface. Everything went smoothly until around 2 a.m., when the group decided to head back. Robert E. Scott, 36 years old, was at the rear of the group. He was third in line as they approached a narrow vertical slot just 75 feet from the entrance. 2 of his companions had already made it through safely. This crevice stretched about 80 feet high and was typically around 12 inches wide, but in the middle, it narrowed dramatically to just 7 or 8 inches before widening again further down. As Scott worked his way into the tightest section, his hand suddenly slipped on the slick rock. The cave walls were wet and coated in mud, making them treacherously smooth. In an instant, Scott dropped straight into the narrowest part of the crevice. He became wedged on his left side, unable to move. The rock pressed tightly around him. There was nothing to grip, no way to maneuver. The natural formation had become a perfect trap. His companions quickly noticed something was wrong. They turned back and found him stuck. These were experienced cavers, used to tight spaces, but this was different. No matter what they tried, they couldn't free him. After 8 hours of failed attempts, they made a difficult decision. At 9:30 a.m. Sunday morning, they left the cave to call for help. Volunteers from 4 local fire departments rushed to the scene. But cave rescues are different from anything above ground. The responders were brave, but most had never faced a situation like this. It soon became clear they needed experts. By Sunday afternoon, 14 cave rescue specialists from the National Cave Rescue Commission arrived from Pittsburgh. They brought equipment, knowledge, and years of training. When they reached Scott, he was still conscious. He could talk. He was in good spirits. After more than 12 hours underground, there was hope. But as the day wore on, things changed. Scott's mood began to shift. He became hostile and irrational. He shouted at his rescuers and refused to cooperate. The team learned that Scott was epileptic. He had been given medication to prevent seizures, but it didn't help. His behavior became unpredictable. Despite the challenge, the rescue continued. A high line was strung above Scott. Slings were placed around his body to try and lift him out. But every time they made progress, he began thrashing violently. His movements undid their work and made the situation even more dangerous. Knowing this would take time, the team set up a full support system. They placed heat packs around him and directed high-powered lights toward his body to provide warmth. They even ran extension cords into the cave and used hair dryers to blow warm air into his clothes. Monitoring equipment tracked his vital signs. He was able to eat and drink. They gave him coffee, broth, hot dogs, and donuts. Physically, he was holding on, but mentally, he was slipping. The team believed calming medication was the only way forward. If they could calm him down, they might be able to free him. But the doctors on site refused to authorize it. In desperation, the team tried to call a doctor in California, someone who understood both medicine and cave exploration, hoping he would approve the use of a sedative. Meanwhile, they kept trying new extraction methods. Inflatable airbags were placed beneath him to lift his body. Grease was applied to reduce friction. The cave walls were lined with plastic, but nothing worked. The crevice held him tight, and every technique failed. By Monday morning, Scott had been trapped for more than 24 hours. Around 7 a.m., he was once again yelling at rescuers. Then suddenly, he went silent. He had lost consciousness. The rescue team responded immediately. They administered oxygen and injected warm intravenous fluids, but there was no response. After nearly 30 hours, Scott's body had reached its limit. With Scott now unconscious, rescuers made the painful decision to use aggressive extraction methods. They no longer had to worry about causing pain. Saving his life was the only concern. Using the high line and slings, they began pulling his body upward. The process was brutal, but it was the only chance left. At 12:25 p.m. on Monday, October 3rd, Robert Scott was finally freed from the rock that had held him captive for over 30 hours. The team worked frantically, hoping he had slipped into a deep hypothermic state and could still be revived. But it was too late. Shortly after reaching the surface, Scott was pronounced dead. The coroner's report revealed the cause of death: congestive heart failure due to irreversible shock. Wabasha Street Cave Tragedy. On April 27, 2004, 5 teenagers entered the Wabasha Street Cave system beneath the city of St. Paul, Minnesota. They had heard about the caves from friends and decided to explore them. The group included Nicholas Lee Larson, 17 years old, Natalie Lorraine Van Vorst, 17, and Patrick Gerard Dagg, also 17. 2 other boys were with them, both the same age. None of them had any reason to believe the air inside the cave would be dangerous. The Wabasha Street Caves are part of a vast network carved out by miners in the 1800s. The system stretches for miles beneath the surface and has long been a magnet for thrill seekers. Warning signs had been placed at the entrances, even referencing the deaths of 2 other teenagers in 1992. But the system remained easily accessible, with dozens of unmarked entry points scattered throughout the area. The group entered through a small opening barely large enough to crawl through. Once inside, the tunnels widened. They walked upright, using flashlights to find their way. They traveled approximately 600 feet into the cave before the effects of carbon monoxide exposure began to appear. Carbon monoxide is an odorless, colorless gas. In caves, it can accumulate over time from fires lit days earlier. With limited airflow and no natural ventilation, the gas settles into low areas and stays there. At some point, the teens began to lose consciousness. One of the boys blacked out, then regained awareness alone in the dark. He managed to find a narrow shaft leading to the surface and escaped. He was the only one able to call for help. Emergency crews arrived quickly. When they entered the cave, they found 3 of the teenagers already dead. Another was still alive but unresponsive. He was transported to a nearby hospital and placed in a hyperbaric chamber. Doctors attempted to remove the carbon monoxide from his system, but his condition was critical. The boy who had escaped was also treated at the hospital and later released. He had been briefly unconscious but managed to survive. The names of the 2 surviving boys were not released. That same night, fire crews sealed the entrance the group had used. Large rocks, tree limbs, and dirt were piled over the opening to prevent others from entering. But the cave system has dozens of entrances, many of them undocumented. Officials admitted that it was impossible to completely close off the entire network. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe for similar ones and feel free to drop suggestions for the next video in the comments.